great to be here this afternoon, I guess, morning or afternoon, and we've got two very experienced chief product officers here who are both very accomplished and have been very successful. So we're going to start the panel with letting them both introduce themselves and maybe take a couple of minutes each just to talk through your journeys and your companies, just to provide some context. Then we'll run through some moderated Q&A, and then try to save about 10 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. And I do have the app as well, so feel free to shoot questions on the app, or you can come up to the mic. Both work. So maybe turn it over to Bhaskar to start.
Okay,
please.
all right, I'll start. So my name is Bhaskar Sankara. So I'm the CTO and I run product at AppDynamics. We started in 2008. I was one of the founders. And over time, in the last 8 years, I've focused on architecture, product. There were some phases where I focused exclusively on product, but right now, I run engineering as well as product, and the overarching architecture. Little bit of quick background. So before AppDynamics, I was at Wiley for about 3 years or so. So that's roughly in the same space. It used to be the market leader. It used to be the generation one of APM, Application Performance Management, at that time. And I worked there for about 3 years in core engineering, building our products. And before that, I started out my career actually in India at a company called Pramathi Technologies. So my product roots are actually from India. Started, did about 5 years there. The later part of it, about 2 years or so, I spent here in the Valley doing pre-sales, doing a lot of sort of consulting for the product, right? So that's my product roots, and then continuing on into Wiley and AppDynamics.
Actually, before we go to Dan, maybe just give them a few stats about AppDynamics. It's one of the fastest growing enterprise companies out there, but just so people have a sense of size of company, or maybe just give them a couple of stats and we go to Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. So really quick about AppDynamics, we're kind of the market leader in application performance management. And we started in 2008, came out of stealth in 2010, and we just crossed the 1,000 mark. So we've been growing really, really fast. And even in terms of revenues, we've been steadily kind of doubling, every year. And we're at a really, really solid, strong position right now. Also at the top when it comes to analysts, etc. But our growth has been truly spectacular.
So like a few hundred million in business size, 1,000 employees. From everything I know, one of the 3 fastest enterprise companies out there in terms of growth, north of 100 mil.
Yeah.
Maybe turn it over to Dan. Yeah.
So my name is Dan Rubenstein. I was actually born in Montreal, Canada. I got very interested in statistical pattern recognition. So I came out to Stanford, and while I was there, I was running the free consulting service that the university department had. And we were getting a lot of inbound inquiries, this was in the early 90s, from many companies in the Valley. This was the beginning of the whole internet era. And so I said, when I graduate, I'm going to start a data mining company. And that would have been an excellent idea, except my roommate at the time came up with a way of making a high-definition display on a semiconductor chip for projection applications, for business projectors and rear projection TVs. And we decided to start a company together doing that. And I did that for about 7 years. We went through 5 rounds of venture financing. We set up manufacturing lines in Japan and Taiwan. And Intel and Sony invested in us. It was a very, very interesting experience. Eventually, Texas Instruments acquired the company. I went to Google. I was a product manager at Google from 2005 to 2009. I worked in many parts of the company. I was, first few years was primarily on AdWords, and then the last year I was there, I was running Google Checkout, which was the precursor to Google Wallet. Then I went to Facebook as a PM director. Spent about 4.5 years there as well, running various parts of this site, including 1 year in the news feed, and then search monetization as well. And then I left a couple of years ago, did a short stint as an entrepreneur in residence at Coastal Ventures, got recruited to be the head of product at Palantir, spent about a year there, and decided I wanted to get into the healthcare space and do something that meaningfully touches people's lives. And that's the company I'm at now. It's called Health Coda.
Great. No, thanks, Dan. So maybe just to start things off, I think every entrepreneur or every company, likes to think they're targeting a large market. Yet the key often is to kind of segment the market, right? So any thoughts on market segmentation or customer segmentation?
Yeah, I can start with that. So I think that's a really, really important thing to nail down right in the beginning. It also depends on, obviously, what type of product are you building. So in our case, we build application performance management, which is relevant to multiple verticals, so it's not really targeted to a particular vertical. So definitely we had more breadth there. But within that breadth, I think it's really important to identify what segment do you want to go after. Is it the enterprise? Is it the small market, right? And that's a very important question that we answered early on in the beginning as we started. And we always stuck with targeting the enterprise, right? Because the product you build, the scale you build, the sophistication that you need, because very, very early on, like as you go into an enterprise, the scale, the numbers, everything you're dealing with is completely different. So a lot of product decisions are based on you making a call on, choose enterprise. Because if you kind of stay in the middle and say, I'll appeal to both segments, then you don't really do a good job of targeting a particular segment. So that's the high level for thinking about segmentation, at least from our end.
Yeah, I think you said some good things there. I think customer segmentation is actually very hard to get right. And I think oftentimes you won't realize it until you're far along. There was one product we worked on which was targeted at small businesses. How many small businesses do we have here? Okay. I bet if I asked each and one of you, like, what is your business? There's no such thing as a small business segment, actually, right? Like, there's nothing that unifies small businesses other than the fact that they're small. And so we had a product where we were trying to make tools for small businesses to create their online presence. Okay, and there were like 10 of us in the product team, and we each adopted 3 small businesses and went and talked to them and tried to figure out, okay, what do they need? What features can we build for them that will help them get their business online as a small business? And we very quickly realized a few things. First of all, a lot of them have the small business owner isn't the person who's actually going to create their website. They usually have some technology person that they outsource it to who's responsible for all that. So this idea that somehow this small business will create their own website is actually, most of the time, was incorrect. And the other thing is, all these small businesses actually are very, very different from each other. You have different categories: restaurants, judo studios, retail. And if you try to build a product that's based on this, I would call it a false segmentation, right? Where you pick a dimension along which you want to segment, and it turns out that that's actually completely the wrong dimension, i.e. size of the business. That's the wrong segmentation. And you build a product that doesn't make any sense because that's actually not a genuine segmentation of the markets. And figuring this out quickly and iterating is very important.
So, so let's say that the new company, or you've got a startup and you're kind of building your initial product, right? Everybody wants to kind of get the release 1 correct. So any thoughts on, during product development phase, what's the right way to either iterate with customers or iterate on features? How many customers do you typically want to interact with for consumer or enterprise product?
Yeah, so I think what you do typically, you make a list, you start off with a hypothesis about what is a problem we're trying to solve, and is this really going to be an important problem to solve? And before you spend a lot of time actually building anything, go and talk to people. It doesn't matter who it is, just validate the hypothesis. And I think you'll quickly discover, here are the things that really truly are a problem, and here are things that will make it nice to have. So figure out what are the key pain points that you have. And I just, this morning, I walked down if you guys haven't had a chance to walk in the exhibit hall, there's some very interesting companies doing some cool things. There's one called SwarmX who's building have you guys seen this? The drone company with no? Okay, so they have a base station where the drone is going to fly and it's coming back and it's getting charged autonomously, right? So the problem with drones is you need a human being to supervise it. So this company has actually built a base station where the drone comes and it's getting charged automatically. And you think to yourself, okay, what's important about this, right? So the long-term vision of the company is to build solar panels so it can sustain itself and be self-sufficient. But in their V0, they focused on just proving the basic concept that the drone can come and find the platform, and they connected it to a grid, and the box doesn't look very attractive, right? So there's all kinds of things you might say, oh, we have to make it look good, and it has to be solar powered, and it has to be self-sufficient. All these things shouldn't be part of your V0, your MVP. You need to figure what is a critical feature, what is the thing you need to demonstrate that's truly the most important.
Yeah, I think I would start with the hypothesis itself. So that's, as a startup, you always have a beginning hypothesis, right? But I think the most important thing is to identify the user. Who are you going to sell to? And identify, what use case are you solving? So again, if I take an example of what we did, application performance is, it has various stages, right? There's development, there's, pre-production, there's production, etc. So once we identify the user and once we identify the use case, so let's just say we want to solve only production problems, then have a lot of conversations. And as Dan said, it doesn't matter, initially, because you're still not, you don't have a product yet, right? You have a bunch of ideas that you want to really put out there. And then have a lot of conversations and use those conversations and be flexible and be ready to pivot, right? Because as we started, we thought about, we want to build exclusively for the cloud, right? And then we thought about, we'll build for production in the cloud. As we talked to enterprises, back in 08 and 09, we realized that not a lot of applications were already running in the cloud in production. And that's where we knew we want to focus on. That's where the money was, right? We didn't want to focus on development and staging environments. So that, gave us enough information for us to really kind of start figuring out that this is the focus, this is the area that we want to focus on. And once we narrowed it down to operations and productions, then for us, obviously, it was picking the user for production environments. And it is really the operations people that we wanted to build that for. Then you start asking them questions, right? And the questions are always two kinds. One is obviously you ask them about what they're doing right now, what the pain is in terms of what you're trying to solve. But you also have to ask them really kind of thought-provoking questions in terms of the vision you have of the product that you want to build. And that makes them react to, your ideas. And that's the synthesis of what you want to build in 1.0. And then there's the iterative part of how you do it, but that's briefly the process of the questions in the beginning.
So how do things change, as a company starts to scale, either in terms of number of users or customers, or number of employees? There's companies go through phases, right? So any thoughts just in terms of on the product side or the CPO?
Yeah.
What's it like for the first,
So I'll tell you, so I did, this is my second startup. So in both cases, when you first start in the first few months, half year, it's just you and your partner, right? You're sitting in a room. Our first case, we had the back office of a flower shop. Now we're in a small incubator. And the communication is fluid and constant. It's almost like you're, two bodies, one brain, right? There's no challenge of communication. Everyone knows what's going on. You're all in it together. I think what tends to happen as a company grows is all of a sudden the communication becomes very important. And that's where you end up spending a lot more time managing, strategy, what's happening, what are our plans, getting everyone on the same page, dealing with differing opinions, reconciling them. And as the company gets even bigger, when I joined Facebook, there were less than 1,000 people. And when I left, there were over 10,000. So, it's both companies. It still had a lot of people, but you just see how much more complicated the intergroup communication becomes. I think, to Facebook's credit, they did a very good job of keeping things decentralized as much as possible, so that as the company grew, more and more decisions were actually pushed down to the various groups. So you didn't have to go all the way up to get approval.
Do you become more risk averse, or how do you keep
Yeah, I think it's inherent in in organizational dynamics that as a company gets bigger, you get punished for doing wrong as opposed to being rewarded for doing good, right? So the fear is always don't mess it up, right? And I think the longer that company can keep that mentality of being aggressive and innovative, I think the better off they'll be.
Yeah. So, you have to be really conscious about scale, right? And then in the beginning, as Dan said, there's not a lot of process. You're really scrappy. You do whatever it takes to get things done. And whether it's engineering team working with sales teams, whether sort of marketing is pitching in to close a deal, to talk to customers, to make that happen, you have to do it. Because to get to the point where you actually start putting in some process, to get to the point where you actually start developing a roadmap and say, I'm going to stick to that, you have to get to the point where you can afford to do that, because your business kind of needs the critical mass. You also need validation that people are reacting to the ideas in the product, not just in a way of saying, this looks really cool, but they actually want to pay for it, right? So you have to hit those milestones before you start putting in some process. And process is very essential as you scale from 100 to 200 to 300 to 400. And there are different elements of scale as you go through all of that. But the most important thing to remember, and it goes back to sort of risk aversion and aggressiveness, is that you shouldn't lose focus on the fact that you have to keep innovating, right? If you listen to Steve Jobs talking about product, he always mentions that you put a lot of process in, you see a lot of meetings happening, you see a lot of sort of whiteboards and this and that, and you almost start confusing that for innovation, right? Because process is not innovation, it is much essential for what you need to do. The essential part is you want to make sure you're innovating and you have the vision that you want to do 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. That's being driven, and how you drive it and sort of decentralize it a little bit, but still having like a singular source of vision as far as the product is concerned, because you want to put something out there that's very coherent for people who are using it. Like the story has to be very solid when the product goes out there. So again, it's a balance. You have to put the process in, but you can't take your eye off what you're fundamentally doing and make sure you keep doing that.
So there's a question, on the, somebody submitted a question saying, how do you balance innovation versus reactive feature requests?
Yeah.
So how do you balance resources, around that, or how do you handle it?
So I think this is where a lot of products get off the rails when you start listening too much to the field. I think if you look at typical product development, right? You have this idea, you say, okay, what problem do we want to solve? And you build your thing, and then you put it out there. And now you have your sales team running around trying to get users to use it, and they come back and say, oh, I can't sell this because these 3 features are missing, and my customers are asking for it. What happens if you don't have a good process in place? I remember, like in the early days of Google, salespeople would go and try to find engineers who were available to help them build the feature they needed to sell their product, right? And it was almost a quasi-random process. Depending on who you knew in the company, you got your resources if you were lucky. And what we slowly moved to was a more formal process where the salespeople became part of the planning process in a very rigorous way. So we would have a quarterly planning session where salespeople said, here are all the things I really need to have. And then the product managers and engineers would say, okay, here's what we think the product needs to be, and share the information across the entire team. Make it very transparent. Why are we building these features? What's the most important thing? And then, then you can, I think, to answer the question, how do you balance? You have to lay it out and have a rational discussion about why is this important? Is this a unique one-off? And most importantly, avoid the loudest, the squeakiest wheel in the room, phenomenon where the guy who complains the most and is most vocal gets his feature. That may not necessarily be the right decision. You need to have some objective framework for evaluating whether it's, number of customers or market size or the depth of the problem that a certain feature will do. So it has to be a very rigorous analytical process as opposed to just who's complaining the most.
Yeah. So I agree with a lot of things, with basically pretty much everything Dan said. I'll cover a different perspective, right? I think the key is how do you give yourself a chance to rise above the feature war as you go into the market, right? And there's only one formula for it, and that's differentiation, right? Because when you differentiate and when you go out, even as you are a new entrant into a particular product type, if you have some differentiation, then people look at what you're offering to them versus the balance of what else is in the other products, right? Because as we went to market, our space was fairly mature. There's a lot of tools that are deployed out there. So if we get into a discussion with them saying, hey, I can replace this tool, right? You guys can come in and take this over, but you need to do these 20 things for me, then it just goes into one of those never-ending sort of loops, right? But if they say, oh, I'm using this tool, and this is my cost of ownership for this tool, something as fundamental as it. And I look at your tool and I know that all of my guys can adopt your tool in a matter of weeks, right? That's the differentiation you create. So unless you give yourself the opportunity to rise above like a point feature war, it gets really hard. So you have that foundation. Having said that, it's tough to avoid in some areas. And then I think what Dan said really kind of keeping the focus is really important, but I think the differentiation part is the most important thing as we look to products, yeah.
So maybe to go to a slightly different area. In most technology companies have world-class engineering teams, and in most companies, I'd say product managers are actually very ineffective, right? So it's a little bit of a dirty, sorry?
Ineffective or effective?
Ineffective, right? I mean, my view is in most companies, most technology companies, you have engineering teams and you have product managers and product management teams, but in most companies, product managers or product management is actually not very effective. And in most cases, when you look behind, the screen, if you will, engineering is actually, kind of driving a lot of things, right? And product management might be running a loose process, right? But they're actually not the secret, right? So, question really is like, what makes a really, really good product manager? Or, for both of you guys have both been very successful. Right? What do you look for, like when you try to recruit product managers, or if someone in the room here is looking to bring a product manager into the company, what should they look for? So any thoughts on that? Any of that?
Yeah. So I think I've probably interviewed well over 800 and probably even over 1,000 candidates for product management over the years. I think this is going to sound obvious and trite, but the most important quality is you need someone who's actually passionate about products. And so there's a bunch of questions, and it's not so much, it's not like I can give you one question that will be the litmus test, but take a very simple question. One question I like is, I ask the person, how would you design a power strip? Okay, this is like the most boring thing you can imagine. Okay, it's like almost like a stupid question. What's in a power strip? And the first thing, two things happen when you ask that question. And you can come up with your own question. It doesn't matter what the question is. But the thing you need to look for is, do they get excited about thinking about product ideas? Does a spark go off? Do they get all animated and excited and they say, oh, wow, yeah, that's it. Or do they kind of get the deer in the headlights look, oh my God, what are you talking about? What are you asking me this crazy question? And I think good product people tend to start thinking, oh, what are the different use cases? Why would people need a power strip? What kind of things can you tweak on a power strip? Oh, I can make the plug come out at a 90-degree angle, or I can make it flush against the wall, or I can have a surge protector, or I can have, compact, or very long extension cable. So good product people, first of all, get excited about product ideas and product innovations. The other thing is I just wanted to say about the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of product managers. There are different types of product managers, and you need different types of product managers at different times depending on what situation you're in. So there are some projects which are brave new world. You're doing something that hasn't been done before. It's completely open landscape, and there you want the product manager to give you vision and guidance and thinking about what this could become. If it's a more mature product and it's very complicated, you have either a manufacturing line or you have a very complicated enterprise software, you want someone who's good on the details. And for the most part, as human beings, we're born with a certain amount of life energy, right? So it's very hard to find someone who's both excellent on the vision and big thinker and also very good at the details. They tend to be on somewhat opposite ends of the spectrum. And so you need to find the person who's good for your situation at hand. And so to say, what's a good product manager? I don't know that there's any one excellent product manager. Sometimes you want someone who spikes on design. Sometimes you want someone who spikes on engineering. Sometimes you want someone who spikes on the project management details. But figure out what you need for your situation and then find someone who's good at that. And I think if they're ineffective, it's because they're mismatched for what the need is right there.
Yeah, I think, like Dan said, it's such a wide set of skills that you need to have, and what you really have to think about is, think about a team where you supplement, gaps in skill sets, right? Because you want to create a team that fires on all cylinders from multiple aspects. I mean, it's one of the toughest hires, right? If you look at the ratio, if you have 100 engineers, you might have 10 or 12 product managers, right? And so you have to be way more selective, in your hiring process, and you have to be very deliberate about who you're picking. And it takes a while, but at the same time, you can't sort of look for the perfect that's why you think more in terms of a team and how everybody, supplements their skills. It's also a role that needs respect across departments, right? So it's important to have someone who is very passionate, who's opinionated, but he has to be able to work really well with people and earn their trust and credibility as he works with, he or she works with, sales or marketing or engineering, pitching ideas, because they're really working by influence, right? And so the personality as well is very important when you really hire one.
So maybe let's open it up for a few audience questions. Anyone have any questions?
Hi, thanks for a very interesting panel. We're often told that the current way to release products is to ship and iterate and to let our customers shape the product. But we're also told that you only get one chance to make a good first impression. How do you balance between those two pieces of contradictory advice?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, so I can go first. So yeah, that's a great question, and that's one of the toughest balances that you have to strike, right? I think it really depends on what is the core. So the core of the product has to be behind the vision that you have, right? But the iteration, it really focuses on some of the smaller elements of it, right? So it's how coarse or how fine-grained is your focus. There's a lot of iteration in things like the user experience. So when you start building the user experience, you want that to be iterative, but the foundation of the user experience in the use cases that you're solving is your differentiation and what you want to bring to the table and solve it, right? So don't look for very, very coarse answers as you kind of differentiate and as you iterate, rather, but focus on some of the fine-grained ones, and that's where the balance is.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Sagar. Initially, we started with a mobile app, and then not everybody is going to download my app. We had a very valuable backend. We exposed it through API. So going forward, do I need to focus on both, or how do I balance these?
I just want to make sure I understood the question. You're saying you have an app, and now you're focusing more on the API, and you want to know whether you should continue supporting the app or just offer an API for your back-end service? Is that the question?
Right.
Well, I guess I don't know much about what you're doing, but the question is, what is a challenge? Are you offering a very valuable service? But
Yes. Yeah, it's called POS-Script. It's a single API to connect to multiple POS systems. So instead of competing with my other apps, actually, I can make them partners.
yeah. So I don't know that there's one answer for every situation for this. I think rising above the noise level and getting users to install your app is a very, very big challenge, right? So if you either don't have the talent or the market that is, you're able to do that successfully, and you can target a few key partners and offer them an API for your service, that might be a better alternative for you, right? So if you can talk to 5 big partners that can use your API and then offer your service to many, many users, that's something to look at. I think the challenge there with just being a pure API play is that eventually, well, I mean, there's examples in each case, but I don't know.
We had to eat our own dog food. That's why we have the app. And
Maybe what we could do is, if you like, after the panel, feel
Yeah.
free to come up
Sure.
and chat more. So next question, please.
Hi, my name is Abhijit. Thanks for sharing a lot of insights for a budding entrepreneur. So my question is more applicable probably to Bhaskar. When your company is growing, how do you put more focus on diversification rather than just on the growth so you won't get disrupted by somebody else?
Yeah, so I mean, diversification, especially, it really comes down to at what stage you start to diversify, because growth a lot of times is based on diversification and expanding out what you're doing, right? And you want to set that up for the future. So in the beginning, you want to stay very narrow because you can't, and again, when it comes to differentiation, you can't differentiate when you have a very broad set of things you want to differentiate on. But over time, I think you have to pick the right adjacencies, and you also have to pick, the buyer. For instance, if you want to say, I want to build something which is probably to a completely different buyer, that sort of dilutes your focus on what you're trying to do, right? So try to create an ecosystem where you focus on the same buyer and then diversify, and I think that's a great formula to add more to your arsenal.
It sounds like we're out of time, so maybe we can do the last two kind of offline. So thanks again, Bhaskar and Dan, and thanks for a great panel.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashim.
Yeah.